Good morning again. 10:40, about 10:55. We're running just a few minutes behind, but we're glad to be talking with our Herd Management Technologies. Looks like Daniel Smith might be leading the conversation.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir.
Is this what you want to show?
No. Just a minute.
So if you turn off sharing for a minute while you're introducing yourself, and then you're all good.
I'm the executive director of the Agritech Institute, and I'm not very good with tech.
Well, I joke around, Dan, that
I'm an honest guy.
everybody thinks that I am, but I'm like an old dairy cow. I know how to get to my stall and get to it well. And everybody says, well, you can do it easier this way. No. This is the way I do it.
I'm a carpenter and I can run a saw.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try again here.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. There we go. Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Dan Smith. I'm the executive director of the Agritech Institute. I have to go back a little ways. I was a member of the Legislative Council here in the late 1980s. I'm not that old, 1980s. And I worked with Senator Starr, starting in 1987. Pretty much, I'm still, he's going to get on the board of the Institute. So it's a little, Bobby said we're in good shape with you, Senator.
Thank you.
And I have to say, as a former member of the council, I appreciate your words on the floor the other day about the Border Patrol agent.
Thank you. Thank you.
My career was really devoted to working on milk price regulation over many years and many projects and initiatives with Bobby all over the country. Roger Albee, who was the Secretary of Agriculture under Governor Douglas, approached me about 5 years ago and asked if I would help him work on a new concept of trying to promote technology for smaller farms, that on the idea that Vermont was starting to fall behind in the adaptation of new technologies. So kind of broadened my portfolio, and Roger being Roger somehow managed to get me to do this. So I've really moved away from milk price regulation after a number of decades, and I'm working pretty much full time on this. We were before the legislature with Senator Collmore and the former committee a couple of years ago with regard to our first technology, which is virtual fencing. I'm really here today to report about how we've made out. I've asked two of the farmers that have been involved and the general manager of Stowe Electric Department, which was one of the sites for one of the projects, to participate. So we've got a pretty full agenda. So the idea, I'll do a little bit of an introduction on the project itself, virtual fencing. I realized this morning you're all new. So as you said, fencing is, we're talking virtual fencing and just what that is. And then we'll hear from Kristen about how it worked on one farm. Then we'll hear from Jackie about the utility line maintenance. And then we'll hear from Ben. And then I'll just do a little summary and where we're thinking about next steps. 2 seconds on the Institute. As I said, we're trying to bring Vermont forward on the use of agritech tools, and the mission is financial and environmental sustainability. And in addition, as you get along, the potential for improving farmers' capability to be involved in reducing climate change, not just in their operations, but generally is a potential with the adoption of agritech. So that's the mission. What we've come forward is, as I said, we're looking for established and early stage technologies, combination of academic research to find them and on-farm trial. So I did the academic research, talked to my network, and we came up with virtual fencing as the first technology. And the idea to the right, you use your phone, and what you're essentially doing, this is Ben's slide, you're using your phone an application on your phone with the blue to set fence boundaries, virtual fence boundaries. And the animals wear a collar, and the collar receives the transmission from the phone, sets the boundary. That is in turn transmitted to the GPS satellite, and then the collar and the satellite communicate the boundary setting. And then once that's set, then the collar transmits to the animal and sets the virtual fence. So if the animal, you see the little notes, the animal gets a auditory signal first as it gets within a meter, and it's calibrated in volume and intensity as it gets closer, and if it's moving faster, really signals the animal that they're getting close. And then if they breach the boundary, they get a shock. And it's not a shock enough to disable them or anything like that, it just lets them know you crossed the line. And if they have to breach, they're running from a predator, they can go back in without a shock. So it's better in that sense than a conventional fence. You'll hear, I think that the technology itself really works. There are some issues that I'll get into, but that in plain sense, that's the way it works. So we've been around the Ag Tech Institute, that's Ben's cows, and they're lined right up, and the line is right there. You know, and where's the fence? Well, it's there, and they know it. It's really quite remarkable.
You have one that's doing like all cows, go reaching as far as it can reach.
You got it. That one is in process of being signaled. You got it. You got it.
But it is interesting that the chair, when we started saying, I know where to go to my stall, and the cows learn really, really quickly where they can go and where they can't. It's kind of like the invisible fence for dogs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
The big difference is no line in the ground. It's virtual.
Yeah.
And they have those with dogs now too.
Yeah.
So, and when Kristen.
Well, one question, you
Sure.
probably, so when you change the boundary.
Yeah.
Do the cows get used to, like, I know ours used to, they used to get used to it, and then when you move the fence, it takes them a day or two to go, oh, hey.
Yep.
It can go further.
Early season, when they're learning the process, there is that lag time. But as the season moves on, they're conditioned to it, so they know. There's always a few that test to make sure the battery's still where they think it is, and then as soon as it's not there, they start flowing ahead.
Always
and
have
draw
one or
the
two,
rest of the group ahead.
So we're doing, I just wanted, so we've got the goats at Magic Mountain. So it's cattle, with beef and dairy, and then we're all over the place with different goats. And so it's a new world here. We got goats, grazing instead of weed whackers on a ski area. So, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but that's kind of, it's both Ben and Doe's Leap, the other farm, they both speak to it as a game changer. And it really has quite a bit of potential that way. So, in summary, I've had over the 2023-24 period, 3 Vermont cattle farms, 2 in Maine as well, 7 small animal projects, and 1 goat dairy farm. And the goat dairy farm is really interesting because it's increased the milk production, and you'll hear about that. So the farms are Ben's Farm, Snug Valley, the Harrison Home Farms, the dairy over your way in Middlebury. Richie Westman on his farm is trialing it with some cows. And then on the vegetation is sheep and goats, so larger animals, smaller ruminants. We're at Washington Electric this past fall, Stowe Electric, Magic Mountain. Where'd I go?
Oh, I think, yeah,
I dropped.
timed
So
out.
it's coming.
Oh.
You went past the barrier.
You're lucky you didn't get shot.
We don't
It did the ding on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna get shocked if we don't get back online, Linda. You're gonna shock me or what?
Is it, can you get back on?
We have to share the screen again, maybe.
See, I, good to have my pulling guard here. I have to say.
Okay, is this it? What you're sharing? That one?
No, it's that one.
This one, okay.
Okay.
But why isn't it on there?
I didn't do anything this time.
Some other committee is getting.
Well, while Linda's talking, so we're 2 utilities, Washington Electric and Stowe. Magic Mountain that I mentioned, ski area. We did a project specific to knotweed on a river, which is really quite remarkable, down in South Londonderry. We did a project with lambs at Shelburne Farms trying to get to a sensitive water area there and ran into coyotes. So predators are an issue with the technology. And last is Doe's Leap. And those are the projects. So what I thought would be helpful was to just kind of in broader strokes identify the project as it's worked. Then we can hear from participants, and then I'll kind of give some summary. So that's kind of where we are.
I'm sorry. Can I use that?
Just to keep the conversation lower. And maybe I'm getting ahead of it, Dan, but the funding, we had a little bit of state
Oh,
help
good.
and some federal help too, right?
That's the bottom part of the slide that
Okay.
just dropped off. Very good, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as I said, we were here just exactly 2 years ago. So it was a 2-year funded project. The legislature put up $150,000 and routed it through VHCB. And they've been very easy to work with and good in terms of administering the funding. Legislature put up 150. The Dairy Business Innovation Center put up 60,000 and change. V-Light, which is the low-income advocacy group of the utilities that took some of the money from the nuclear settlement a number of years ago. They put in some money there supporting initiatives that are cutting edge, which this would be replaces chainsaws basically on utility lines. That's the idea. So they put in some money. And then the Linalac Foundation put in seed money very early on because of the water quality issue. And I think I don't know if it's the sleeper issue, but the really strong, I think, advantage, in addition to helping Bend's management, as I said, environmental performance is the other piece of this. The capability, and Ben can speak to this, I hope you will, to better manage sensitive water areas in the farm. You can keep the animals out with the virtual fencing more effectively and in areas that you can't otherwise reach with conventional fencing. So you have those labor savings and things you would think about. It takes 5 minutes to set your fence line versus an hour and a half. That's its own bucket. But the idea that you can keep the cows out of a wet area of pasture or keep them out of streams is really a big advantage of this. So that's where the Linalac Foundation came in, and it's become really a bedrock piece.
Is that right?
Yep, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so that's,
And I'm
Okay.
doing it now.
okay, roll down and then summarize the funding.
It's the one up.
One up.
Why not?
So, if you could zoom in Doe's Leap at this point, Linda?
Zoom in which, please?
Kristen at Doe's Leap?
Kristen is here. Kristen, do you want to turn your,
Yes, I think I'm on now. Is that right?
You are.
Yeah, so I am, we have Doe's Leap Farm, and we've been milking dairy goats and making farm-fed cheese for about 25 years, and really focusing heavily on forage-based goat farming, which has been, it's filled with challenges. Goats are notoriously difficult to fence. And they really like browsy, varied terrain. And I sort of feel like a lot of goat dairies in Vermont have very limited pasture use, mainly because they are such a challenge to keep fenced in, net fence. They're very good jumpers and athletic. And so we have been watching this.
Kristen, I'll just have you state your name just because that's what they asked us to do. If you could just state your name.
I'm Kristen Doolin, from Doe's Leap Farm in Bakersfield.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've been watching this technology for a while, and we're trying to get involved with, virtual fencing, and it wasn't really readily available to us, and we had a lot of sort of limitations in terms of being a dairy and limited cell service, and it's also quite expensive. And as I said, we've been farming for 25 years and have a lot of physical fence infrastructure already. And so someone linked us in with Agritech Institute, which was a really important connection, because they, a couple of things is one, we could access the access the fencing that wasn't really ready to be on the market because it was still being piloted. So we were sort of access it ahead of the game. And then Agritech was sort of doing this. They'd fund the fencing. You could try it for a year, see how it works for you, see how it works for your situation, and then buy it if you find like it's, you know, something worthwhile. So those are two things that were really important because it is an investment and we didn't know how well it was going to work and how it was going to. So we started that in mid-July of this year. We got everything on, and it was actually quite interesting to have it sort of start mid-season because it gave us sort of like a really good control to see how it was affecting us. And I think we'll be showing a YouTube video at some point that will sort of show the training process. I was worried about how it would go. Like you have these goats that, you know, we move fences after every milking. So after every 12 hours, they're in a new fence and they have to come back to the parlor. And then we move them with border collies sort of back out into a fence. So the thing that's different with a dairy animal, obviously, than a meat animal is that the meat animal is staying, you know, on the same pasture for longer periods and sort of moving sequentially. Whereas a dairy animal has to move back and forth to the parlor twice a day, which requires a lot more like going in and out of new paddocks. And so that was an additional challenge that we didn't really know what we were going to get into. So lots of movement, lots of new fences, new paddocks every 12 hours. And so the video we'll see will be absolutely day one of training our goats, the first time they were ever exposed to a virtual fence. So when you watch that, you'll see sort of their highest stress moment and how quickly they learned and how quickly they responded to it. And then, so it was super interesting to sort of we had sort of baseline milk production per goat. We had, you know, we were grazing in May and June. And then I said towards the end of July, we implemented this fencing. So we had May, June, and July, we had sort of milk production data, and we were able to compare, you know, our herd of goats from this year to last year. And this year's the herd, due to genetics or whatever, was running about 3% improved milk production over the herd from 2023. And we implemented the fence in August and September rolled around, and suddenly our milk production jumped up into like 12 and 13% improvement in milk production. So we were getting, you know, a 10% bump in milk production, which actually, as a cheese maker, milk is very, very valuable. And it resulted in quite significant cost benefit for us. And so additionally, we were also using a lot of land and the reason why we were getting better milk production is that we were able to put our goats on land that they really wanted to be on. You know, goats, and you'll see this in the video too, goats love browse, they love woody species, and that is their preferred forage, and they will eat a ton of it, but it's very, very difficult to fence with net fencing. It's frustrating. You're visualizing, you're going through neck-high brambles and thorns and bushes, and you're trying to drag an electric net fence through, and you just don't do it to the amount that they're capable of. So we were able to just sort of zip in these little fences in these areas of the farm that we hardly used because it was so labor intensive. Goats were eating voraciously through all this food. We were using areas of the farm that were kind of off limits to us, and our milk production really paid off as well. So an additional benefit that we sort of found as well is that, you know, goats are also really comfort animals, and we would have areas like you'd have like this hot spell in the middle of the summer, and you'd have areas that you sort of would naturally fence that would be easy to fence in, but maybe there wasn't a lot of shade, and maybe it was, you know, whatever, but you had this beautiful grass you wanted to use. So we would find that we could just sort of make this fence line and would use like this beautiful grassland we wanted to use, but we could zip it up into the woods. And so they would have like this little woodlot area that in addition to, you could watch them on no fence. You can see where they are. You can see where they spend their day. And they would come out and like graze this delicious forage for an hour or so. And then they would go lounge and ruminate in the shady woods and be super comfortable, and then come back out and graze, and they weren't like stuck in this hot paddock. So those are the reasons why milk production, incredible labor savings. And the other thing that was amazing was how effective goats stayed where they were supposed to be. We would have goats on a regular basis. Like, goats don't really go off and disappear. You know, they're really homebodies. They like the barn, the comforts of the barn. So like on regular basis, goats would escape our electric fencing, and you'd see them you'd have spent an hour and a half setting up net fence, and they'd be out there for 45 minutes, and the bugs would be bad or whatever, and they'd jump the fence, come back to the barn. You'd bring them back. We would do this multiple times a day. The fencing was very effective at keeping the goats where they were supposed to be. There are some challenges and limitations. We have poor cell service, which limits what we were effectively able to do. It would be much more effective with greater cell service. As a result, it took us a long time to load a fence onto a collar, which means that we would load the day's collar on the night before. That was fine, but we didn't have enough time. Our cell service wasn't good enough to actually load a collar after milking to their evening paddock. And so we were still using net fences there in the evening because that milking period wasn't enough time. In an ideal situation, we'd have good cell service. We could take 15 minutes to load them into their new place. It would take us an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours sometimes to load all the collars. So we were limited to only using it during the day. The other factor that we wanted to touch upon, I think, was predators. And yeah, we did not have any predator problems, but we were very careful. And we used to run our herd with livestock guardian dogs, and this would be an amazing fit for a livestock guardian dog. And I imagine, that one thing that I would like to ask No Fence, is to have a collar for a guardian dog as well, so that you're putting them in with the goats. But so we do not have a guardian dog, and we do have a lot of high tensile fencing around, and we were just careful with where we put animals. We put animals in what we consider vulnerable areas of the farm when we knew we were going to be around and sort of paying attention, or maybe even working out in the woodlot or nearby mowing hay, or just sort of in the vicinity in these areas that were sort of on the edges. And the good thing about, the No Fence is you have your phone, and if animals are stressed, like they hear coyote pack or whatever, if the animals are stressed, they actually start like checking. They come near the fence line and they get an audio warning, and your phone gets notified when your animals start being warned. And so if there is ever a stressful situation, suddenly you get 4 or 5 goats that are getting warned and maybe even shocked. You're suddenly like, I think something's going on, and you could go out to the field. So we definitely watched that when we had them in areas that we thought were vulnerable. It's something to be worked on. Maybe we may need a dog again in the future, but we operated the fencing well. We put our goats in. The other thing about dairy goats is they were out at night in the evening, but we would put them in at dark. I would have been very reluctant to leave my herd out there without a guardian dog all night. But that's not what we did. We brought them back which is what we've always done, even with the electric fencing. Electric fencing, we did not prevent predation at night for us in general. So that's sort of the brief synopsis of what it did for us. I don't know if you want to look at the video, and then if there's any questions on.
Sure.
This is the video fencing training video?
Yes.
Okay.
George is really good, I have to say. Crystal's partner. Good sound. There's sound, Linda.
One area. So in this case, we have a small field.
Can you expand it, Linda, to take up the whole?
No fence, virtual fencing on the outside.
Yeah, down in the corner.
Down right here. There you go.
And on the top part of your screen, or the north part, is the virtual fence line. And so the goats will only have to kind of interact with that and not be confused. And once they've mastered that, they can then move on to 2 sides, 3 sides, and finally 4 sides. Okay, this is our test drive for our new wireless fence system. And the goats are in learning mode right now. So the way this thing works is that we have set a boundary, I'll show a picture of that. And that as the goats approach the boundary, the collars start to sound. So, I don't know if you can hear that. But there's a chiming sound going on.
Hear
And
that?
that noise gets increasingly loud with a higher pitch to alert them to turn around. So we have a number of goats that have gotten the electrical pulse, and hopefully it's learning that there is a boundary there, and they can figure this out. Just over the boundary right now, you might see one or two cross it. The idea is that they learn as soon as they hear that noise, they learn to turn around. So they're already respecting the one over there and that might they're not. So the way this training process works is that we have this net fence up as a visual boundary. This is also electrified, but we only have one kind of virtual boundary that they are learning. One just got shocked and they're moving. So they're just learning one boundary. As soon as they get that behind their belt, which it could take a day or two, we then introduce it to two boundaries. And then we finally will have them trained complete. So these goats are right on the edge of the boundary. I don't hear anything coming from the collar. So they are already learning to respect that. And I will say that once they go through, they get their electrical pulse and they cross the boundary and go back into their paddock without getting shocked. Pretty cool system. I've got a goat right up in front who is getting stimulation. Oh, she just
Did you hear the sound? Yeah. Yeah.
So they are learning quickly. It's pretty cool.
So it ended up taking our goats a total of 3 days to learn the system and to be out independently in a completely virtual pasture without any physical boundary. And this system is an absolute game changer for the farm and has worked extremely well.
But yeah, and looking at the video, just sort of know, like, you've got a good idea of what goats really like to eat, and sort of can envision how we're utilizing the land a lot better than we were when we had to put, physical fencing up in those kinds of areas. So yeah, that's, if anyone has any questions about how that works for us, or.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you were downloading, you said it took time. If you had Wi-Fi, if you had Wi-Fi out in the barn, would that help? Does that help?
It does not work. It has to be on cell service. And what's interesting about this, it only loading onto the collars requires cell service, and it takes time. But once they're on the collars, you don't need the cell service because it's all GPS related. So it doesn't slow down how the fencing actually works once you're using it. It does, we did have like the only detriment was if we would load the collars and then put them in an area where we just had no cell service at all, we couldn't follow them on our app very well, but they were in there and contained and getting shocked as they should and everything else. The collars worked perfectly well once they were loaded, but unfortunately it's not Wi-Fi. And we actually did try to buy one of those cell booster towers or something. We played around with that, spend a few $100s on they're supposed to improve your cell service in an area, and that didn't really make a difference either. So we have, 1 to 2 bars on our farm. It works. It works very well. It works well enough for us. The other problem, which we found out on the first day, is that also this was a little bit of a problem for sure. To get your goats off the pasture, you also need cell service to get them off. And so the first time we started using it, we went out there to take our goats home to milk, and we couldn't get them off the pasture because the cell service wasn't fast enough. So that was sort of a snafu that we didn't really realize. But there is a part of the app that allows you to, if you're in proximity with the herd, you can remove the collars by Bluetooth. And so what we'd have to do is we couldn't really remove them from afar. We had to, you go walk to the herd, you turn on Bluetooth, you take them off, and it takes maybe 45 seconds, so not a big deal. And then you can bring them home. And they are working on, I think, to improve the app to actually get you so you can load the collars via Bluetooth as well. So in that case, that would be it's not there yet, but I think it might be coming. I could stand in my herd and I could load them onto a new pasture with Bluetooth and not need the cell service, but that's certainly not the case yet.
It's still slow. I'll speak to that in the summary. That it's an issue. The cell service issue in Vermont is an issue.
Clerk Almond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Kristen, where is Doe's Leap? Where are you in the state?
We're in Bakersfield, Franklin
Baker.
County.
Well, we gotta
Yeah.
figure out a better cell service. That's our first chore.
Thank you. It's much appreciated.
And the second question, and if you don't want to answer, I certainly understand, but you sound like a happy customer. Does that, I mean, you're selling this thing pretty well, I think, to the committee. You're going to continue with this?
Well, we were actually, yes, we actually in the process of trialing them or whatever, we actually applied for a DBIC grant and got funding through DBIC to purchase them. So they are ours now. And yeah, this is definitely, yeah, we're definitely, we'd never go back. We're giving away our net.
That's all I wanted to hear.
What's the cost? What's it cost you?
The cost to us is, well, there are a couple costs. I think it's approximately, you've got chargers and batteries, et cetera. It's approximately $250 a collar. And then you also have to pay an annual fee for the app, which, runs about $1,000 for our herd. And we did find that it actually, it was nice to have it was great to have the grant, and that definitely made it a no-brainer. But as we looked at the numbers at the end of the season, definitely paid for itself again, because the increased milk production that we had, the increased milk production, because we make cheese and it's such a high value milk, we're not shipping commodity milk. It did, I think it was something about $6,000 of income that we generated as a result of this bump in milk production only, and that was only for half the season. So I think that they would probably pay for themselves. Again, we have a high value product, an increase in milk production really pays off. And I think that even without the grant funding that this would have been, but is my hope because, NRCS and all these programs help a lot with physical fencing projects. And it's my hope that maybe some virtual fencing projects come on board to as part of those programs, because they really are vastly superior to physical fencing.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned something earlier in the presentation concerning predators and conventional fences would keep predators out. And what do you have to do to mitigate that with this product?
I know, like I've talked to a couple people who are thinking about setting up for, using virtual fencing. And the thing with, if you're using management intensive grazing, you're moving small paddocks, every 12 hours or 24 hours, you're moving through a lot with temporary fencing. And some people have opted to still set up a good perimeter fence. Like if if you have 75 acres that you're grazing, to put your electric high tensile around that perimeter, and then you are grazing using virtual fencing within that. So you're not dealing with all the net fencing and the moving, et cetera, and you're moving them more flexibly, but you still have a good shocking perimeter that would help. So that's one avenue. And the other thing is, livestock guardian dogs are incredibly effective. And we lost animals with our electric fencing because it's a hill farm. We have 60 acres of fence through hill and dale, and you're not keeping coyotes out of it with electric fencing. And so we lost animals when we had them out at night with electric fencing, and a livestock guardian dog takes care of that. So we haven't had to do that. Again, we haven't gotten another one. We had a dog for about 10 years. if we start having problems, we'll probably get another, but that seems like the easiest solution. And people are using them with electric fencing already, because if you're leaving your sheep out all night on net fencing, it's just, they're still vulnerable. They're still vulnerable. So
How many sheep do you have?
we milk 50 goats approximately.
50, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, I was just gonna ask, does one cell service work better than the other? Cause I know like where I am, Verizon works better over in AT&T, but you go up to Lincoln, AT&T outdoes.
Verizon and AT&T have both worked, so we're all over the state.
Mhm.
And those two services, AT&T and Verizon work. T-Mobile, for some reason, we haven't been able to figure out work too well, so, yeah. But the issue is more the lack of cell service than the provider. That's the real problem. And, you know, like I said, I got 8 trials, and so I'll summarize for you a little bit. I have a feeling I've done too much information here, but we'll see. Can we hear from Jackie with Stowe? Thanks so much, Kristen. That's terrific.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, so you can hear me all right?
We can.
Great. So I'm Jackie Pratt, I'm General Manager of Stowe Electric Department, and we had Dan and Slippery Slope Goats in to work on about a mile of our sub-transmission line here in Stowe. And we selected that area for a few different reasons. One was that it's pretty rugged terrain, so it's one of those areas that's pretty challenging to clear out with traditional methods using our tree crew and our mulching excavator head. It's an area of town where that sub-transmission line supports Mountain Road, so it's really vital to have high reliability in that area. I don't know if you're familiar with Stowe, but that sub-transmission line serves the mountain and a lot of our tourism destinations in town. And then also to Dan and Kristen's point, it had cell service throughout the full mile. And it was really, really important for us as we were sort of scouting areas to run this pilot project, that we knew for certain we'd be able to connect with those callers and make sure that they were able to do what they needed to box their goats into the GPS fence and be able to communicate with those callers on an ongoing basis if necessary. So we scouted that out ahead of time and identified about a mile of line from Majestic Heights up to the cross-country ski parking lot for Vail. And the goats came in and it was great. I got to pet a whole bunch of goats, so my day was made. But it was really great to see them work too and get into that underbrush and clear it out. There was a noticeable improvement in the understory growth once the goats were complete. I think we had a few different challenges as a utility that we would want to take a different approach with going forward. Goats are predisposed to eating certain types of vegetation, and the woodier, larger growth, which is the type of vegetation that we want to remove as a utility, was really not their forte. So following completion of the project, we did get before and after pictures. We actually came in with our traditional methods and just cleared out whatever was remaining. I think that the best application for us as a utility, and we're going to maybe potentially try and pilot this going forward over the next couple of years, is to put the goats on line that has been recently cleared and use them as more of a preventative measure to inhibit continued growth of that type of vegetation that we would then need to come back and clean up. Cost-wise, the goats were less expensive than market rates for bringing in a full 3-man tree crew and the mulching mower and the guy who uses that. However, when we do manual removal of vegetation on our transmission lines, that's generally on like a 7-year cycle. I think if we were to use the goats on an ongoing basis, we would probably want them out there maybe to start with every other year to see if that was sufficient to inhibit the growth that would cause us to need to come in and do a full removal. So I think that the outlook here is to try and get them to come back on a fairly regular basis so we can assess the efficacy of using goats on a longer term to kind of circumvent the need to go back in with a heavier hand every 7 years on our trim cycle here, 5 to 7 years. And in that instance, the cost may be a little higher for the goats, but the environmental impact and the overall quality of what that's providing, both for the herd owners and the agricultural side of things. I think that that still may come out on top as a win for us. But it's a different perspective being a utility operator than actually owning and running the goat herd. So I don't know if you have any questions along those lines, or Dan, if there's anything you wanted me to call out specific to our project.
I think you covered all the bases, Jackie. It's very helpful. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Did, you're in Stowe, so did the ski area kind of look across and say, maybe that's something we could do as well?
Yeah, they were actually really excited about that. After the goats left us, I believe they were headed down to Magic Mountain to do some trimming on the ski slopes. And I believe that Vail was very interested in continuing the conversation with Amy from Slippery Slope to see if maybe they could get something going up at the ski slopes here in Stowe.
Actually, with me, I'm the.
Oh, Dan, okay, I wasn't sure who they were speaking with on that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're able to find enough goats? So you can find enough goats for effective removal of the area that you need as far as to get them in there? There's enough goats available to do the work? Yeah,
so that's the question on an ongoing basis, right? I would say it took about, what was it, Dan, like a week and a half they were there to do the mile.
Yes.
So over a season from, call it April to October, you got about 6 months. Call it 26 weeks, you might be able to do 26 miles of line if that's the speed at which they operate. But again, it really depends on the terrain, and it depends on the condition of the vegetation before the goats come in. If it's pretty overgrown stuff and it's due for a full trimming, I don't know that I would put the goats on there first, as we did in this instance, but I think that the kind of experimentation here at identifying the most efficient use of this kind of vegetation removal is part of the learning process. So I don't think there's anything lost by having done that. I think we actually gained some knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when the goats go through, does that save your man hours if you send the mulcher up? It probably doesn't, but if you're sending a crew up, getting all that underbrush, does that save you money because they don't have to deal fighting through that to get to the?
Yeah, so that's the theory, right? So the larger growth, in the event that the goats came through, the intent was to have our guys just come back out and cut the larger growth that the goats didn't get to. But I think that section of line had gone a little too far for the goats to be as effective as we had wanted them to be. So yes, that was the intended theory, but I think what we ended up finding practically was it made more sense to still come in with the mulcher. It was much quicker than it would have been without the goats having gone through first. But I think now we're at a state where we can see what happens on that proactive maintenance approach with the goats, like preventing that growth from happening over the next several years for our 7-year trimming cycle.
Oh, if it's trial and error, right? You figure it out and then you do with what's best and figure it out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, from the perspective of like public relations, the community was pretty excited to see the goats come in. Trap Lodge is up there and they have some bike trails that run adjacent to that, and they use sheep in some of their fields. So I think from a tourism perspective and being in Stowe, I think that the concept of doing that in this location was a pretty good feel-good story for us as a utility, I think for Dan and his team as well. But from a security perspective, we didn't want to get out in front of it and announce that these goats would be there and have a bunch of people showing up trying to pet them, things of that nature when they're trying to get the job done. So it's a delicate balance between like, hey, let's tell this really great story and let's like maintain the integrity of what needs to actually happen out there on the ground. So that was an interesting dynamic as well.
Were these meat goats that you had, or were they milking goats so that they,
I believe these are meat goats. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. I believe they were
Yes,
meat
yeah,
goats.
that's correct.
Right,
Yeah.
so they could stay right there. They didn't have to come in and out for milking and all that.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a follow-on question, water in that, I know that.
Yeah, so, the, system, similar to what Kristen said, they came in every night, so, because of the predator issue. So it created a surround for the animals where they would be in at night, and there was water available to them there. So, yeah.
And there was a brook that transversed the power lines as well that they had access to throughout the course of the day, I believe.
Well, good. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
What's next?
No, gonna hear from Ben.
So,
Can I be the,
No.
no, no.
I mean, you can try, but I rather have looked at it. I have the documents here if you want me to. Do you want to get back to your?
let's see what happens. Can find you. Who voted you?
So I was looking, what are some of the downfalls?
Of the collar usage?
Yeah.
Yeah, Linda, can you put Ben up? Excuse me. Go ahead.
The
Snug Valley.
sundown.
Go ahead, Ben.
So to your question, downfalls are,
Just introduce yourself. I
I'm sorry,
apologize.
Ben Notterman, Snug Valley Farm, we're in Hardwick. We were the first farm to start trialing these collars back in '23, so we've had 2 seasons on them. Large ruminant collars for beef cattle. So the downfalls are, some lack of signal, cell outages, battery life, it can be a challenge, but there's new batteries that are, being developed that'll, mitigate that problem. And then there's the human user error, which was probably the top on our list. There's a pretty steep learning curve for us to figure out. We can manage grass, we can manage cattle on grass, but then managing cattle on grass with this new technology that we're learning along with them, that was probably the biggest hurdle. But once we got over that, it was pretty smooth sailing. So,
You're up.
okay, all right, so yeah, Snug Valley Farm. Obviously there's Dan and Kimberly Hagan, and then Mercedes, who worked for, No Fence, who was out for a field visit. This is out visiting some of our cattle on grass. So we had the first year 64 collars, 63,
Yeah.
65 collars, something around that group. So it was a cohort of beef all together that stayed together for the entire season. So we weren't adding animals or taking animals out. So they were probably 700 to 800 pounds when the grazing season started. So they were grazing with the collars through the full season as a cohort together. And we had great success with it. Like I said, there was a lot of learning curves that we as the human operator probably didn't learn it as fast as the cattle did. They adjusted very quickly, like 2 or 3 days of training, like much like Doe's Leap. Overall, very happy with it. Lots of labor savings, and actually, if you remember back to July of '23, we had pretty catastrophic flooding. We were physically cut off from this group of cattle, which was on the other side of Hardwick, for 4 days. We could not get there. And had they been on traditional, like polywire reels, step-in movable posts, which we typically use or had been using up to that point, they would have had to break the fence to get to fresh grass, and they would have concentrated all of their impact in one zone, and that 10-inch rainfall would have been a muddy mess. So with this no fence collar, I was able to keep advancing their front line, just making their paddock bigger, keep them in feed, and from making a muddy mess to lessen their impact on the heavily saturated soil. So that was like unforeseen benefit. Like nobody could have thought that would be a thing, but it really saved their bacon at that point.
So you can, I guess that brings up a great point. So you're not actually walking the boundary, you can draw the boundary.
Yep, so I've got some clips inside this of like what the app looks like. They've now since updated it, so it looks a little different, like the user interface is a little bit different. So here, I think that's a YouTube link possibly. I don't know if it'll work. If you click on it, there's a short little clip.
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
PDF.
Okay, then, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
So here we have the cattle grazing. So we graze in a manner, we do holistically managed intensive grazing. So they aren't fixed paddocks. We vary the paddock size every day to match the conditions, the grass needs, how fast the cattle are going through it, and what our objectives are for that piece of property. So this group here, as you see, it shows up inside the application as little white dots. So each collar gets its own dot. The blue outline is the perimeter fence. They were moving, I'll stand up real quick. So this property is split into an east and west side. There's a perimeter fence, high tensile perimeter fence around the outside, and then a single wire high tensile fence in the middle to differentiate west and east side. And that's based on how we were grazing previously with stepping reels and walking out a line every day, just like leapfrogging them ahead. So we were using the virtual fence as the front line and the back line. and not so much as sidelines, because they're contained in a high tensile fence pasture. So every day we overlay. So say previous day they were up here where the screen is. This is where they're spending a lot of time. The previous day we overlaid the new paddock with the previous paddock, shut off the previous day's paddock, and then they just migrated into the new paddock. So that was some of the learning curve that I was talking about. When we first started, we were creating paddocks that share a fence line, but those cattle didn't want to cross that because they knew that's where they were getting shocked. And the collars, as Kristen said, update at different rates. So one might be done in 30 seconds and one might take 25 minutes. So that was not a reliable way to do it without the animals being unduly stressed, shocked, toned, warned. So we figured out this overlay system and it's worked seamlessly. They just flow into where the new forage is. And then on your phone, when you see everything's moved into the new spot, just creep the back line up to the previous fence line so they're not going back to the grass that they've already grazed.
What's the darker, greener shapes?
So this is one of the functions inside the app. It's called a heat map. So where they've spent time, obviously their water was here. I think their mineral bucket was here. So anywhere where you can set up a different interval for each, or for the collars to be pinged and located, whether it's every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes per whatever your requirements are within the app. And that's pinged by a GPS. The updates are via GPS for location, which is then sent to you by cell signal in Wi-Fi to your phone or cell signal to your phone. So they were hanging out in this spot. So there might have been a lot of sweet clover there. There might have been really good orchard. I can't remember what time of the season this one was from. But so they spent time there. So there'd be like multiple location pings. And then as a group, it just tells you like something had their attention there, like their water was there was shade. There was something that was really sweet for them to eat or had minerals that they were deficient in. They're really good at balancing their system just with what they have on the ground. So like sometimes I go to a spot like, okay, why are they going here? It'd be bed straw, which is like an invasive, a native invasive plant that takes advantage of like low ground cover. Not always palatable, but for those instances, it must have been really sweet or had some nutrient that none of the other grasses has. So they hit that first, and then they go to the clover or the grass. So it's really interesting to see. You can kind of pattern their grazing.
Yeah.
So if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so here's an overlay. This was our training facility, our training paddock. So our barn complex is here with the head and neck chute and wintering facilities, feed facilities. So this paddock here is in high tensile, so it's perimeter high tensile. We use it as like a holding paddock. It had really good grass in it. Nothing had grazed this. This would have been like mid to end of May, I think the year when we first put the collars on. So this is a snapshot from the first year. And this was the training line. So the training doctrine is you give them inside of a perimeter fence, you give them a line across, much as Chris was saying, where the grass doesn't change one side to the other. And they graze up to it, they get toned, they go, oh, what was that? They go a little further, they get an electronic pulse on their neck. They go, I don't really like that, I'm gonna go turn back. So after 2 days of that, they respected that. You could see the graze line, like tall grass, unmolested, grass grazed. So they really learned the system really quickly. There's always a few that always test the line, like of course, but that's even with a high tensile or step-in post, they like put their nose on it. Did they remember to turn it back on after they set this up? Can I walk through it or duck under it? There's always those, and you get notified if there's a pulse or a tone, and you can go to a certain collar and look like how many times was it pulse today, or how many times it test the fence. It's really interesting because it's always the personality is really kind of the surface. Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah.
I'd be getting shocked a lot.
For a while.
I should have included a video, but I walked holding and I should have grabbed a collar. I have it in my truck.
Every time I do that.
It's in my truck, yeah, sorry. So, and if you want to see it, I can bring it in after. There's two chains that go down either side of the neck, a rubber pad over the top for comfort. And I walked through the fence line just to see what they were holding in the chain in both hands. It was significant, but way less than if they touched the really hot high tensile fence with their nose. Their neck's a lot less sensitive than the tip of their nose because that's like got all their sensory, smell, taste, like everything's right there. So I'd rather get zapped by the collars than by the high tensile nets. Thank you, slide on to the next one. I don't know if I have any exclusion zones in this one. So here is kind of what it looks like when you look at all of the paddocks. So this is like 3 grazings of this pasture, all the paddocks overlay. And since this was done the first year we were using it, I think you can color code the fence lines for each rotation, and you can shut different rotations off, so you can only see certain layers. There's a lot more user interface to look at layers inside the application. So like, where did I graze the first year or the first pass versus the second? And then there's the exclusion zones, which I don't know if it shows up in one of these. So in this pasture, here's one right here. At this pasture, there's a big wet run. The field has a lot of subsurface water, and then it comes to the surface. And with the app, you can say inside a perimeter fence or a virtual fence zone, like create an exclusion zone, so they can, like Dave was saying, keep them out of a sensitive wet area, so they're not unnecessarily making muddy water, creating damage, any number of things, which, to set up a fence, a polystep-in fence, and then go, oh, I gotta fence this other section out. It takes a lot of extra time, and then you're walking maybe through rough ground, deep water, like,
Yeah, through the middle, you gotta run a dedicated wire into it.
If it's in the middle, it's a real challenge, whereas this, you just draw the perimeter and hit exclude, and they'll keep it out versus in. So, very handy on that. Lots of labor savings. If you wanna go to the next one. So here's some of the different paddocks within the app. This is what it looks like when you draw your singular paddock. You go to calculate like the area. Obviously, it's a Norwegian-based app, so things are in hectare. And I think you can switch it to acres now. That wasn't an option the first year, as they were working on a US version. So these are all in hectares. And there's 2.5 acres per hectare, roughly. So yeah, it gives you a lot of variability on size and just a lot of flexibility in general. Going to labor savings, we run typically 4 groups of cattle from 40 to 80 head per group, depending on the property. So it takes a lot of time for us to go to each group every day. It's like a 3.5 hour, 4 hour turn to be able to hit every group, move them all ahead, move their water ahead. With using no fence, being able to do it from afar on your phone, we figured it saved us 45 minutes to an hour a day of labor per every time we moved this group of cattle. So 180-day grazing season from middle of May through end of October, middle of October, or whatever 6 months is, it saves, we figured, I back the napkin app, it was.
Pushes 20 days for the season.
Yeah.
That's what it does.
Yeah.
That's been a pretty common finding, 20 days.
We can lengthen our season, but as well as just labor savings every day. Say you bill out your employee with contributions at $30 an hour if you're paying them like 25, right? So $30 an hour times 7, it's $210 a week that you're saving. And that adds up over a season, 6 months times, so looking at the back of the napkin math, you can pay for these collars, even though it's a large chunk of money to buy them. They're about $300, $325 for the large ruminant collars, plus the subscription fee. Just on,
that's $1,000.
It's like per collar, so it's like $10 per collar, or something along those $12, something along those lines. Just buying the equipment for this, the infrastructure, the collar, you could pay those off in under 3 years, and they have a lifespan of 5 to 8. So that really is encouraging. Looking at labor savings, being more creative on how we use technology, and integrating it into our already innovative food and ag system here is pretty exciting. I think that's the last slide. Okay. So any questions?
Yes. So thanks, Mr. Chair. How do you charge them? Do cows have to get them off and they like hang with a battery charger, or how do they do that?
Thankfully, no. They have a pretty robust battery. And when you start the season, you've gone through and charged your whole fleet of batteries for however many collars you have. There's a charger, like a battery, like a cordless drill charger type situation.
Okay.
So you plug them in, charge them, and then install them in the collar. as they go onto the cattle, as you install the collar on the cattle, there is a small solar panel on the side of the collar that helps offset the daily usage of the power for updating, moving paddocks, tones, electric pulses. So we were using these not quite as they were intended, because they were more intended for a static stocking situation, like here's 40 acres, you leave them on 40 acres for 20 days, then you move them to the next paddock. So we're really pushing the technology and the battery power by moving them every day. So we weren't using them in the typical fashion. We had much better luck with the batteries this year, 2024 versus 2023. Europe has an underlying 2G data network that they would use these, or these collars were intended for. Here, where everything's 4G, 5G, there was extra demand on the batteries, and there was something to do, techno speak, with the sine waves were interfering with the whatever in the battery. So the full tinfoil hat solution was literally put tinfoil tape on the battery to block whichever was the offending sine wave. And then we had good luck with that this summer. And they're coming out with a shielded battery for the US markets to deal with it.
Noticed yesterday.
Oh, good. So that'll take off the need for the tinfoil tape.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So obviously a Europe design that came over here. How long has Europe been using them, and
10 years.
And what's their ratio of farms that have picked it up?
So the main reason I selected them was because they've been in business for 10 years. Second reason, it's cell-based instead of internet, which we can talk about. Better application in Vermont. It sounds like internet might work better, but the scale's not doable. And the companies are not in the market to the extent that NoFence is. So to your point, they've been at this for 10 years. They've been through a bunch of iterations. And as far as how many people have purchased the equipment, it was only offered for sale. I'm the only game in town that.
But over in Europe,
in
Europe, how?
Thousands of, in the thousands. They have a terrific website, NoFence. And they show the accumulating number of operations.
And do they show what their largest herd is that they're managing?
That I'm not sure is on those.
So that there's no limit to the size of the herd other than the size of the property is what it can support as far as animals go. There are other companies in the US, one is Fence, but they don't want to touch a herd of cows under 500. So they're really gearing up for the Western markets, and that's not a cell base. They come and set up a tower system over an entire ranch. Like, wouldn't be feasible for Vermont, where there's like 10 acres, 20, 40 acres. Like, we're very patchwork. We're not large contiguous flat places. So that option is not a viable option for Vermont, where it's so patchworky and smaller herd sizes, and just be super cost inhibitive.
Can you put me back up?
So your cost savings is basically labor and time and ease, where the goat farmer was more production.
Right. Yeah. So
less land impact, obviously. You'll have to drive around changing that fence.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, because we have cattle spread out over a 10-mile spread. So
how many head do you have?
In the summer, we typically graze around 200 to 220, depending on animal size.
What breed?
British beef breed, so Angus, Hereford, or Angus Charolais crosses, your traditional beef breeds that you see.
And where are you in East Hardwick?
We're right on Pumpkin Lane, which is right off of Route 16.
Yeah.
So
right there, right by the
ball field there.
Yep.
If you've ever seen the Ben's Pumpkin sign there, that's also grown.
Okay, that's you right there.
Yeah.
Your bridge washed out there a year or so ago.
That was the farm just up from us. That was Riverside Farm.
Okay.
There are back fence line neighbors.
Okay. Yeah.
That which one then?
Yeah. So Ben mentioned it. We had a big shutdown in 2023. The NoFence batteries weren't equipped to deal with 5G. So it shut my pilot down. As Kristen said, I kind of really finagled so that I could keep going, and pulled it off so that we got the equipment. But Brian, it condensed us from 2 years to 1 year. Ben was really our 2 year person. Can you go to the next slide? I understand you guys want to go to one, so I'll try to do a quick summary here. I think you've heard most of the issues, plus and minus. I'm doing a collective report, 11 projects. The commonality is improve the rotational grazing. We're trying to figure out, to your point, Mr. Chair, the trial and error of how this works best in the utilities. It clearly works in the ski areas straight up. Utilities is a bit more of a fit. It's there to be found, I think. Across the board on all of the farms, what Ben talked about, improved labor savings, his experience is pretty common. Something like 20 days to the month is pretty common. The goat work for the vegetation management is better. She's up in the 3 to 4 hours a day. Because, what Kristen described, trying to put set fence in place, you can't do it. So I'm crunching numbers, I'm almost done. But it's there. And the payback ratio that Ben described is also pretty common. I don't think it's as good. It's clearly not as good where you don't have labor expense to offset it against. But with that aside, it is 2 to 3 years, which is, pretty encouraging. And as I said at the outset, the issue of setting exclusion zones is the non-farm operation of this that's got a big benefit. And as Ben mentioned at the end, there's a lot of data in the app to improve your management. And then on the challenge, I mean, you've heard the issue of cell service is a big deal. And on my next slide, my summary, what I'm proposing to do, we're trying to address that. But that's number one. Back 1 second, Linda, hang on with me. I'm gunning here. The upfront cost is the biggest impediment. Yes, you can get payback, but you can't afford it to begin with. So that's a big issue. And then as Ben mentioned, batteries, and as Kristen mentioned, and across the board, predators is a concern. And then the fit to the utilities, we're still working on that. Okay, my final slide to summarize. I'm working on an expansion of the pilot, as Jackie mentioned. She's in for a couple years, so we're trying to restructure our agreement to do that. I think Washington Electric will come in as well. The ski area is up for another year. I bought the collars, so I own the collars. So the upfront costs were all set. So I've just got to figure out how to manage this going forward to continue to gather the data and keep the project going forward. The financing, I've got a pretty good concept to deal with what, so DBIC came in and bought the collars for Goats Leap. So, that's not, I don't think, replicable. So I'm working on a revolving loan fund type of approach for this. And then, to your point, Brian, Vermont Covered, which I believe you folks in the legislature have heard from, they approached me. We're trying to put together a collaboration of, I'm a demonstration of what it means, not just public safety, but extending into other sectors, what it means to have adequate cell service. So they're really terrific. That's a terrific organization. So I'm encouraged about that. And then finally, the more time to get the word out. So I put a lot in front of you. If I could come back at some point and we could talk about the future a little bit more, once I have a better sense of what that looks like, I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.
I think it's very effective to have the users of the product here. Very helpful to get better than a visual. So, yeah. Committee, any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you do think of questions, feel free to reach out.
Yeah.